I am unashamed. What about you?
I probably got a few parasites, but
You got a few. We all do. When we were young, Jace, we used to get wormed because we'd get worms, and from being barefoot, I guess. I mean, I don't know what causes that.
You would get like you would worm a dog.
Yeah, they would worm us. They
rub your throat. They put the big pill down there and rub your throat.
It would be these pills that you took.
Zach, let me give you a cricket word since you're into those words. It was called human worming.
Human worming. I'd never heard of that.
Yeah.
I don't think we were.
When you live by the riverbank and you spend a lot of time in trash piles and mud and.
So how often did you get wormed?
I think it was once a year.
Once a year.
Like when you say they, who's
Dad.
the
Dad and Mom.
They were worming us when we were 5 years old.
Well, and then my famous story, Dad, about you was that someone threw their worm pill behind the space heater, and it was Dad who did it, and he didn't own up to it, so everybody got a whipping.
And everybody got the pills too.
So that's where that.
And everybody had to retake the pill.
Retake the pill.
That's where that came from. The old line everybody up. Phil did that a couple of times in our childhood. Where we couldn't figure out who the guilty party was.
Somebody was not coming.
He just said, "You know what? All of you get up."
Well, it was like the time we got drunk, Dad. It was the last whipping I ever got from you. I think I was 15, and we all got drunk. And
15?
You lined.
Oh, you were older than that.
No, 15.
With WE and all that.
15.
Yeah, I think
that wasn't the last time you got drunk. That was the last time you got.
Well, that right. It's the last time I had a whipping.
And some guy was there visiting, and I said, "Son, I don't know who you are. Wrong place at the wrong time. Bend over his truck."
Because Dad was a
belt on his butt.
Dad he'd give you some commentary, Jace. Remember?
I think what Phil said. I remember that. I guess I was. 10
you would have been about.
I thought I was 10 or 12.
Well, you were. You'd been 11.
And because you stuck that belt in my face after I watched you whip 4 grown men with a belt. Here's how it went, because I remember that. He basically said first, we can either, if y'all want to try to whip me, we can go that route, or I'll whip you if you want to hang around my son.
And Red and Bill's mom and dad, stepdad, were standing there. They were watching all this because he said...
They said, please discipline him.
Yeah, because Dad was like, do y'all want to whip him or do you want me to? And they were like, no, you get him, Phil. We have sanctions.
But I like
behind you all the way.
It started with, do y'all want to just fight? Or if you want to hang around my son, you must endure...
Yeah, now he gave them the option to leave.
They could leave. He said, you could leave because I...
You don't have to take this. You can leave.
He didn't want a lawsuit coming on.
Because this one kid had never been down there before.
And never been back.
And never been
30
back.
years later, the one that was leaning over the truck when I said, I don't know who you are, wrong place at the wrong time.
His name was Terry.
And 30 years later, he called me and said, thank you for straightening us out.
He actually came to church, Dad, and told you that.
I was gonna say
he spent a career in the Air Force after that.
I was gonna give you the sing song. So when Phil got him up, and he synchronized the belt to the behind, he said, I don't know who you are, but you tell your daddy why you got this. That was every time he said a word.
It's a syllabic beating.
Yeah, it's a syncopation there. I
never heard from his parents, so I always accepted it as they were all in.
I mean, that was risky to do that. You couldn't.
Well, it was a different era for sure, but we deserved it. But I did realize, Jace, the reason he opened with that, hey, if you want to fight me like a man, because we were old enough now to know better.
Yeah.
And Dad was like realizing that, he wasn't going to be, even though I appreciate him trying in that moment and it didn't work because I still had about 3 more years of wandering.
By the way, it all came out well for each individual.
Oh, I say all the time, I call it tough love because when you're telling somebody this is the wrong way to go and doing everything you can to try to, get them on the straight and narrow, I look back on that and I respect every bit of that. There's no resentment on my part.
Well, I mean, I don't know when this podcast will air, so I'll give some disclaimers here. But I mean, even yesterday, everybody's back to school. It's early September, and then there was a school shooting in Georgia.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a fluid investigation, and I've only watched 5 minutes of it. But I mean, it was a 14-year-old boy who they said had threatened to do this online last year when he was 13.
Wow.
And of course, what did you do? They had gone to the dad and said, "Hey, your son." Of course, he denied doing that, and so that's what it said. It's a fluid investigation. I read that and saw that, and then lo and behold, he does it. So he was already marked as a danger, and here you have this situation. But it reminded me of that movie. Remember that movie years ago? I'm sure you saw it. It was named Red. It's rated R, so if you go watch it, I can't remember exactly what you'll see, but it was rated R. But I really liked the movie. It's a very quirky movie. It's not the one. There was another movie came out that I never watched with Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, that's what I was.
No,
That's not.
This movie. If you hadn't watched it, because it's at least I would. Can you find that, Maddie? Well, let's get a year on that. Red. I can't remember the main actor's name, but. And if I tell you the movie, you'll probably remember it. So this guy, old man's out fishing, and 3 young youths come up, 15 to 17, I guess. And the guy's fishing, he got his dog there. Well, they tried to rob him. Let's see, we're looking at the movie.
2008?
I think that's it, 2008. Who's the main actor?
That's Brian Cox.
Brian Cox, that's it. So he's... Oh, look at that. 7, so it's 7.0.
Oh, Tom Sizemore's in it too.
Yeah. So what happened was...
An aging widower seeks justice after the callous sons of a wealthy businessman kill his beloved dog.
Yeah, so he's fishing. They try to rob him.
I've never seen this.
Look, the kid, the reason I remember the movie is because the kid he's carrying around a Browning A5 shotgun that you always, loved, and I have several of those. And he just... shoots the man's dog. I mean, like at 5 feet. So you're like, where's this going? But it was old school because the man basically goes and finds out. He did 2 things. He didn't call the police. He did 2 things. He went and found out where the father of this kid was, and he just knocked on the door. And so the guy let him in and said, well, what do you need? He's like, well, your son shot my dog. So he called his son down there, and the son said, it wasn't me. Of course, he's looking at him. He just saw him yesterday shoot his dog.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, yeah, it was you. And he had his buddy with him. He said, you was with him. Tell him. And the dad was like, hey, said he didn't do it. That's it. So the whole movie is about basically the Cox fella. He just couldn't let it go. He's like, you need to take responsibility for your kids. And the second thing he did, he went and talked to a lawyer. But the crime was considered a misdemeanor. It's like cruelty to animals. Like, he's going to get a fine and get 30 days in jail. And he's like, he blew my dog's head off.
Yeah.
Tried to rob me. What are you kidding? And so if you want to watch the movie, it's fine. It's rated R, so I can't remember if there's anything suspect in it. But the reason I remember that movie is because now that kind of behavior seems crazy. And but it reminded me when that school shooting, when I read that, because when they confronted the threats the year before, well, the kid was like, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. And then,
Which I'm sure they have it. And it's not like once you put something online, people.
Yeah, and they had a quote from the dad. It's like, well, we had guns, but he wasn't allowed access to them. So, problem solved. Well, he got access to an AR-15 and shot the school up. But it just reminded me of that story. I was like, the movie's a quirky movie, but I think you see when we're in the context of what we are, of models of families and husbands and wives and your kids, and talking about discipline and what we call old school. Because now I just thought, you won't see movies like that ever again.
No.
because in his mind, he thought, well, I'm going to go, where's the dad at around here? Let's go have a conversation. But then you saw where the problem was.
Yeah.
His dad was like, hey, he didn't do it. He just.
It was just like the guy, Dad, that time when we were living in the apartments before we moved out here. And you looked over and saw there was some twins that lived across from us, and they had your fishing poles.
Yep.
And so
Riding reels.
Riding reels. And so Dad goes over, knocks on the door. The dad opens the door, and he's like, your kids have taken my fishing poles out of my truck. And he looked at you and he said, well, they weren't locked up? And you said, no, they were in the back of my truck, but they're mine. And he says, well, you don't lock stuff up. That's what happens. I mean, now this is a dad whose kids are there, and he's defending them stealing because it wasn't under
because you didn't lock it up.
I mean, and it's your fault, you idiot. And so
did Phil give him the option to fight him?
I don't remember what happened, but this guy didn't know. Dad was a brand new Christian and a pretty rough hombre. I don't know that this man knew.
Was armed.
Yeah, I don't know that this man knew just how bad of a move. But you didn't do anything to him that I recall. I don't remember.
Went out there and got my stuff.
I would have never. If you ever gave me the option to fight you or I would have taken the butt whipping. But I'd heard the stories, and I'd heard mom told me a story. I don't know if it's true or not. That you killed a bobcat with your bare hands. You reached inside of the cage, thought it was dead, and it was alive.
It was a steel trap, and I put him to sleep.
I said, if you kill a bobcat with your bare hands and you
He's not a man to be trifled
and you
with.
say, do you want to fight me or take a butt whipping? I say, I'll take the butt whipping.
Well, then that was Dad's point to us, because all those guys with me that day were older than me, and he realized if y'all want to act like real men, then all right, let's do real men stuff.
I remember this vividly. He said, "Hey, and there's 4 of you. Y'all may whip me." He said, "But you'll never forget it the rest of your life."
And guess what?
We really do need more of that.
Guess what, Zach? There were no takers.
No takers.
We all lined up.
Yeah, y'all chose wisely.
But, we laugh, and because one of them guys became one of our better friends. But look, I'm just going to tell you, at that stage of his life, he was a bully.
Yep.
And there's a lot of bullies on our campuses, in high school. Yeah. And that's the only way you can deal with them. Somebody's got to step up and say, hey.
Who was the bully? Bill?
W.E. Yeah. Oh, was he? He bullied me because I was trying to turn them in for all the I'd already been telling Phil and Kay
was a rat.
All what they're doing, but they were like, they weren't believing me because I was being bullied. I was the snitch.
Yeah, Jason's the snitch. But
Al did a pattern where, like, as soon as he got away from our parents, he would act totally contrary.
Yeah.
But in my presence. And so I would turn him in.
And we know how Jay says about, hypocritical things. So
that's right. It's about integrity, Al. It's about integrity.
Oh, it was.
It really didn't bother me what you were doing. It bothered me that he was lying about it. And I was like,
but as it turned out, they all turned out sons of God.
We did.
Well, it all happened at the back of a Cadillac with a belt. So
that's it.
It was a Chrysler, Jay.
They were old enough. That's why I was surprised you said you were that age, because they were older.
They were all a couple years old.
They seemed like grown men to me. And I thought, is he literally fixing to whip the butts of these men that he doesn't know?
He did it.
And that's what he did. But what y'all did was really bad. I mean, it was a public. Y'all went and got all drunked up, and a lot of people saw y'all. Y'all disrupted.
It was a bunch of camps. They're still down there, and we tore up a bunch of stuff that wasn't ours. I mean, we wreaked
it was
havoc.
Vandalism.
It was a night of havoc.
Yeah, I remember it.
And then I didn't realize that Keith Powell was sitting out on the porch with you that day. He witnessed it. I never knew that.
It was actually criminal behavior that you could have gone to jail for.
That's exactly right. Because we had to go apologize to all the people we messed their stuff up, and it was a walk of shame. So we're down here on the edge of our hunting property. Not always good cell coverage here, Jace. Have you noticed that?
It's called spotty.
And mine is dead as a doornail when we come inside this building. We need good cell phone coverage to be able to talk to one another, also to listen to the Unashamed podcast. And so for the last 10 years, our good friends at Patriot Mobile have been America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They offer dependable nationwide coverage. They give you the ability to access all three major networks. You get the coverage that you're used to without funding people on the left, which we love that about these guys. When you switch to Patriot Mobile, you're switching to people that support free speech, religious freedom, sanctity of life, the Second Amendment, and they're also proud supporters of our military, veterans, and first responders. If that isn't enough, they also have a 100% U.S.-based customer service team that makes switching to Patriot Mobile easy. You can keep your number and your phone, or you can upgrade. They help you find the best deals and the best plans to fit your needs. Here's what you do. Go to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them at 972-PATRIOT. Right now, you get a free month when you use the offer code Phil. So join us today. Switch to America's only Christian conservative mobile provider, Patriot Mobile, by going to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them at 972-PATRIOT for your free month of service. No, but it wasn't long after that, Dad, because that didn't turn me, which probably says something about we get to the point where it's a heart issue, which it was with me. So a year later, when I was 16, I graduated high school, and by now now everything's catching up with me, and my lies wouldn't cover. When you lie so much, to Jase's point, sooner or later it's all going to pile up on you. But you sat me down and said, "You got to go. You got to change or leave." That's what you told me. He said, "We want you here, but you got brothers, you got, your lifestyle. If you want to go live it, go do it, but you can't do it here." Yeah. And so I did. That's when I left. So I was gone a couple of years, but I'm glad.
How old were you when you left?
Yeah, that's when
I just turned 17.
You repented and came out there in the yard. We were sitting there. You would come walking up, and that's when I said, "Well, get the." You
said your line. Your exact line was, "Welcome home, son. We got duck calls to build." That was.
And I represented the older brother in Luke 15. I said, "Don't do it. He's lying. He's lying.
Don't let him back." I was the younger brother in the story, but the older brother and Jase, we were flipped.
I said,
"Were you nervous about going back, Al?"
Oh yeah, but I mean, I knew I had messed up, but I also knew what they didn't know was I really had a moment, like. Yeah, because I almost died.
It was a dangerous moment.
Oh, I almost died. I mean, I came very close to losing my life.
And after I heard the details and watched for a while, I came around.
But then you knew, right?
Well, right. All I knew was terror. I was like, this guy's made my life miserable. Get him out of here.
But Jase, will you vouch for him now, though, after all these years?
Oh, yeah.
We're very close now.
He did good.
But Zach, you said in the last podcast, and I thought you said it well, that you can change. And, we think people will say, "Oh, that old guy, leopard never changes spots." When you give in and submit to Christ fully, and whatever it takes to get you there.
And put this into practice.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Then your life can completely change. And that's what happened to me. I mean, for 4 years, I was a liar, a drunk, an adulterer. And that's what got me.
And your dad, the one that was now putting discipline on the table,
had been there too.
I was walking in
exactly
your shoes or my shoes.
That's right. And part of that, the psychology of that was part of my response, I think, Dad, when I got to that age, because I had already seen the lifestyle. It was terrible.
Yep.
I lived it. It was miserable. Yep. So why would I want to go and do the same thing? You talk about the evil one playing a trick on you, and yet I was walking down the same path. But the good news is I figured it out at 18. Because I meet a lot of people that don't figure it out like you till 28 or 35, and then you just have a trash bags of, litter in your life from stuff you've done.
Right. But what I'm saying is that's where we're at in Ephesians 5 and 6, and that as we were all growing in our faith at that time. Phil was relatively a new Christian. You became a new Christian.
Yep.
I became a follower of Jesus during that, just a couple of years after that. But I've always had a heart since then for people in our society, not so much based on that story, but seeing that story lived out as evidence of what Ephesians 5 and 6 is saying.
Yes.
And I've told the story many times on this podcast, but when I was newly married and I had a neighbor who I thought was 30 years old, and because he was getting drunk with my other neighbors and just acting weird. He was hanging out in my backyard. He was scaring my wife is what he was. Every time I saw him, he was drinking beer. And so I pulled up one day after work, and he was standing in my backyard because there was a fence with a little gate on it, that connected my yard and his yard. But I'm like, I'm all for you coming over if you're invited or whatever. But when my wife's here by herself and he was just drinking beer in my backyard.
Yeah.
So I decided to confront him about it because I pulled in. I was like, what is this guy doing? And so, because my wife had told me, she's like, this guy is like hanging out in our backyard. I don't feel comfortable alone. And so when I approached him, when I got close to him, he's a huge fella. I would say probably 6'4", 320 pounds. He looked like an offensive tackle.
Yeah.
But when I got close, I realized in the face he was a kid. And, of course, I didn't know how old he was, but he's a huge human being. And I was like, hey, what are you doing in my backyard drinking beer? There's beer cans on my grass. That dude started cussing me and threatening to kill me, kind of in gangster lingo. Half of it I wasn't even getting, but I mean, he was like, I'll shoot you with a 9mm blankety blank blank.
I'll put a cap in you.
Yeah, it was that kind of language.
Yeah.
But, I went back to that because I thought we got a Cadillac story, right? We're at the back of the Cadillac.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to be threatened on my own property by some drunken teenager who's bullying people, And I literally gave Phil same speech. I was like, well, I'll tell you what, you don't seem to be armed right now. So if you want to fight like a man in my yard, do it. And you may whip me, but you will never forget what's fixing to happen right now. And so I said, where's your daddy? And he was like, I ain't got no daddy. And I was like, well, I'm fixed to be your dad. I'm your daddy.
I'm your daddy.
I went with the I'm your daddy line.
Pedro Martinez.
And I did. And I kind of shared my faith. I mean, I was like, here's who we are. I'll help you. But, and if you shoot at me, you better not miss. I'm a good shot because you will go down. That was the nature of the conversation. And
this was mano a mano.
So about 2 hours later, I hear a knock on the door. We were actually fixing to have a men's Bible study group that night. Well, it's him. And he in his hands, he had, I didn't know what it was at first. Turned out it was all his marijuana and drug paraphernalia. And I said, what's that? And he's like, this is all my drugs. I was like, I ain't doing any drugs with you. He's like, no, I know. I'm saying you're gonna be my daddy. Let's get rid of this. And so
that's quite the story. I remember.
So I turned on the garbage disposal, and that's the first thing we did was because I thought he was trying to set me up. I thought the cops were fixed to show up at any moment. And, it was a long journey, but I really became that guy's dad for a couple of years.
Whatever happened to him?
I don't know. The last time I saw him, he was actually, had a little uniform on, one of the fast food restaurants, walking down the road, and I picked him up and carried him to work. But the fact that he was working, because we had moved from that house then, I just happened to see him. He's hard to miss. And, he came to the Lord. It took 2 years for him to come to the Lord. He just listened for 2 years. I carried him around. I tried to get him in football, but, and different things. Because I was like, you need to be on the offensive line. But, I think it was a positive experience. At least he didn't wind up, being the focus of some kind of shooting investigation.
He had the potential to do it.
Exactly. He was into that gangster world. It was the same thing you see, the violent video games, the watching pornography 24. Because, all he had was his grandma. What's she going to do? And here's this guy who's bullying everybody, and somebody needed to step up. Now, was I uncomfortable in the moment? Yeah. And I thought, could he have killed me? Yeah, probably still could. But
And way back then, you weren't that much older than him. I mean, just a few years.
oh yeah, I mean,
You were young.
yeah, I'm not saying I was going to whoop him, but
Now, I'm just saying
Yeah.
that, like, you weren't even thinking to take on a role. I mean, your kid, you don't even have kids at that point, did you?
yeah, I think we might have just
I don't
had.
believe it did.
Yeah, I don't.
So we're talking.
maybe not
You were in your early 20s.
early 20s.
Yeah.
But and since then I've had various roles where, because what our society needs are these father figures. You know, when like in cases like that.
That's what's missing.
I'm involved in one right now. Same kind of deal. But I think the text is talking about the ideal. And husbands and wives in Jesus becomes a beautiful thing. I think it shows that there is a creator. This was God's design, because it
Yeah.
is beautiful and it is best.
So I don't know about you guys, but when my wife is fired up, she's been to a conference or she's read a great book, and man, she finds something great spiritually, it fires me up. Zach, are you affected the same way?
I am, Al. I love it when Jill loves Jesus more.
Yeah, it just makes everything better, right? So there's an event coming up we wanted to share with you. It's called Share the Arrows event. It's September 28th. It's in Dallas. It's a day dedicated to equipping women with clarity and courage to navigate today's world. And so it's going to be an exciting event. Our good friend Allie Beth Stuckey, who's also on Blaze with us, is going to be leading this. She's got some incredible speakers there. Rosaria Butterfield, Alicia Childers, Abby Haberstadt. Plus, there will be music by the great Francesca Battistelli. They're able to do this by the generous support of Carly Jean Los Angeles, which is a brand that aligns with our values and our faith. Help all the God-fearing women in your life experience powerful teaching, encouraging fellowship, and inspiring worship by attending this amazing event. Go to sharethearrows.com today. Select from the following packages: general admission, the breakfast package, the VIP package, and the premium all access package. That's sharethearrows.com. Go there today and check them out. And Zach, he painted that picture in the last podcast of sexuality as God created it, and then it creates life. But the idea is the responsibility continues on generationally. So you got the parents, then they become grandparents, and the beautiful thing is that we all get to the point physically. Obviously, we're married as long as we all have been. You don't have kids anymore, but you get the joy then of your kids now creating that same life.
Yep.
So you got those children, grandchildren, but when you can do that generationally, you have that influence. You have those memories. Just what Jason described. It's a natural, built-in device to be able to keep people from going off course and getting into all this stuff.
Man, I love that picture of the family too. Like even like extended family. Like we live here in North Carolina, and I've got my brother and his wife and their whole family lives here. My sister, my dad. And then when we were in Louisiana, we had even like all the cousins. But I mean, if you look at the amount of influence just from my people that I'm blood related to that love Jesus, that it's a community that surrounds my children. And that is an accountability. And that is that you want to talk about life. That's it. And I love this painting this picture over and over again, that the opposite of that is all by yourself and alone. I don't know the story of the school shooter in Georgia, but I can guarantee you one thing: he was a loner, because they all are, right? Man, it's not good for man to be alone, and you get to look at I think sometimes we hear these, we hear them as rules on sexuality. We read 1 Corinthians 6 that flee from sexual morality, and we're like, man, that's limiting. And on the surface, it does, right? You're limiting my pursuit of pleasure. That's who would want to be a part of anything like that. And even the way it's painted in the press and in current cultural media is that these are oppressive and these are limits that are put on your freedom, and it's painted in that way. But to see it in that way is actually to misunderstand it completely. God is not limiting you at all. What God is doing with these commands is he's actually giving you the pathway to experience true fulfillment and ultimate life, which, by the way, you know what it is? It's serving others. That's the whole picture that he's painting with the husband and wife in Ephesians 5. Like, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. How did he do that? I've mentioned on the previous podcast, Philippians 2. I mean, he says, man, that's where real fulfillment is like laying down yourself for somebody else and like serving and sacrificial love. And that's where fulfillment is. So that's the picture that we keep kind of moving toward. But in our culture, that's countercultural. And you don't get there by sitting in the boat and drifting downriver. You gotta go against the flow of culture to get to that place that God wants us to be.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the guys in my inner circle brought up a good thought, and he usually does, just discussing what we discuss on the podcast. And the reason we're telling these stories is because you can read Ephesians 5, and if you're just looking at it from a rule standpoint, it becomes uncomfortable for people. But if you really look at it for how thrilling it is, what you have in Jesus, and knowing what will work and what will become
We're putting
beautiful.
real life flavor into these texts.
Well, it's being seen, and he brought up an interesting passage I'd never thought about, that there's a story, and we can look it up, where a queen was inquiring about Solomon's kingdom, and she had heard all this stuff, but when she actually showed up, she had a line like, only half of what I heard is true, because it was way more thrilling on what she saw. And the reason that he brought this up was, this idea of hearing something or thinking something from a factual basis rather than seeing it for yourself. Well, Jesus brought up that same story in Matthew 12.
The story, by the way, that Jason's talking about is 1 Kings 10.
Yeah, the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah.
There it is. And so Jesus brings that up in Matthew 12, where it says, the queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom. And now one greater than Solomon is here. And that's why when you read that story, you'll see that the whole point of it was she was saying that little line that said, only half of that, what I heard, was true. Because she was thinking, let me go look at this for myself. Mm-hmm. Well, Jesus is tapping into that. And the reason I brought it up is because the next paragraph gets into this idea. When Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you. He replied, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Pointing to his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. And he wasn't, people who read that who are only looking at half truth is saying, oh, well, Jesus was against family. Oh, no. It's just the contrary. He was saying there's something bigger that's motivating family dynamics and relationships, and that's me. And so that's why when you read the previous verses to the husbands and wives, you remember this interesting thing where he says in verse 12 of chapter 5, he says, for it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything is exposed by the light becomes visible. For it is light that makes everything visible. That is why it said, and he makes this quote, wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a mystery as far as where that came from, because it's not in any other verse in the Bible.
Right.
You say, well, where's that from? So evidently it was a hymn or a song, but when you start thinking about the context of Ephesians and looking at how thrilling being in Christ and having Christ as your focus is for your marriage, for your kids, for your life, for your community, being a part of the church. I mean, it is thrilling. Once you come to him, it becomes way more thrilling, and it's not some set of rules or, how do we get this right, or what did he mean by that? And I think that was his point, saying who my real family is. And I just think that's how we should approach it. The the thrilling aspect of that. And even dissecting into that phrase, you think about, well, that's what happened when your old life that you shared your story was exposed. When it was brought to light, what happened? Christ started shining on you, and all of a sudden, everybody knew what the problem was. Yeah. There was no secrecy anymore. There was no lie. It was just out there. Right. It became visible. Well, that includes all these verses that we read. You remember the John 3, after the most famous verse ever, for God so loved the world, he sent his only begotten Son. Well, then that next section gets into the becoming exposed for Jesus.
So, Zach, inflation is, as Dad would say, it's a bone to be chewed, and it's causing a lot of problems, eating up people's savings and a lot of issues. Right?
It's a big issue.
Yeah, and we've got a new sponsor called Alpine Gold, and basically you can start earning a competitive return on precious metal leases that allow investors to protect against inflation. Which is what we need, right? Alpine Gold offers gold leases that pay you in gold. Everyone is eligible to start with returns of up to 3.5% annually. So you get these gold backs, which, Zach, you have some there.
I do.
Which is the world's first physical interchangeable gold money that is designed to accommodate even small transactions. So with gold backs, you have privacy. And really, for the first time in human history, you can spend physical gold on small transactions, such as a smoothie, by using the same type of money for large transactions, such as a remodel on your home. This solves the 2,600-year small coin problem with spending gold. Alpine Gold is proud to offer the industry's best pricing for gold backs, an inflation-resistant currency that is made of gold. Buy, spend, or grow your gold holdings with gold backs. When you buy 100 gold backs and lease them, Alpine Gold Exchange will give you 5 gold backs on your first lease payment. Payments occur 1 month after your lease begins. Limit 1 payment per person. Zach's got several gold backs, and so we encourage you to check them out and see if it's right for you. Learn more about gold backs by visiting alpinegold.com. Use the promo code Unashamed to receive free shipping on orders over $200. That's alpinegold.com. Use the promo code Unashamed.
So it says in verse 19 of John 3, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God. And I think that's what that little phrase means. It's like you were dead, which is obviously a reference to what he had said earlier in Ephesians 2. Remember when he said, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. And because of that, you were objects of wrath. But what happened? But Christ shined on you. You became alive. You went from darkness to light. It's the same concept, and it's all over the New Testament.
Yeah, and it becomes something that is it motivates you. Yeah. When you recognize, I want to read Jase this in 1 Kings 10. You were talking about the Queen of Sheba. Listen to what she got when she looked and she saw all that Solomon had. She saw all the wisdom. Here was her response, and this is 1 Kings 10:9. Praise be to the Lord your God. So it's not her God, but she's recognized how great God is just from meeting Solomon, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. Isn't it interesting that she took out of that the idea that there was goodness there because of who God was? And then she gives him 9,000 pounds of gold.
9,000.
4.5 tons of gold and precious stones and spices. So, and look, but the reason why she did that is she was giving it to God. I mean, I firmly believe she was making that.
Oh, that was it.
That was an offering.
That was my point. She was trying to figure out what this guy was all about, but she was only listening to what other people were saying.
Exactly.
The whole point, I think, why Jesus brought it up was like, look, once you experience me,
That's it.
it's way more thrilling and way more beautiful than you could ever imagine.
Right.
And I think that's what gets lost when you come to passages like this, because people are like, well, why would God set this up like this? Because he knows what's best for your life, and it's way more thrilling. Don't fight it till you try it and see it.
Well, and that's why we talk about this so much on this podcast, because I know there's so many of you out there listening. You're young in the faith, maybe you're young in your marriage, and you got the stuff every day. And we mentioned how the evil one is setting all these traps and attacks for you and trying to get you to look at stuff you're not supposed to and talk to people. And you're like, man, I just don't know. It just seems like, how can I do this? We're trying to say you're on the right path if this word is leading you and the Spirit is living in you. Don't just be patient, live it,
That's right.
commit to it. Don't
Well,
give up.
Yeah, it's that. I was thinking that 1 John 5 passage when it talks about how we know we love God, and basically the answer is, well, you keep His commandments. But there's this amazing caveat. He says in verse 3, and His commandments are not burdensome. So if you view the commandments of God as a burden, as a joy kill or a joy still, or like limiting or whatnot, you're really misunderstanding what God has for you. And I would argue that you're missing the benefit, the real joy of coming to Him. And you see this in the Old Testament too. In Psalms 84, it says, "The Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does He withhold from those who walk in Him and do what is right." And I think that's the big shift. That I think that's why the world says they want you to see anything that is in the Scriptures, anything that is in kind of the kingdom ethic, which, by the way, it is called an upside down kingdom for a reason, because everything seems backwards, right? But they want you to view that as limiting, or the evil one what does. He wants you to view that as limiting and as a limitation of your own personal pleasure and joy. But it is a lie from the pits of hell. And all you got to do to know that it's a lie is just go the opposite route and say, what happens if I just pursue everything I want? Like, nobody who pursues everything they want ends up in a place that's good. They end up either dead, hooked on drugs, or in prison. That you don't end up in a great place when you say, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to serve myself. Whatever I want, I'm just going to go after it, and I'm going to get it. That if that's how you approach life, I promise you, you are not going to end up in a place of joy, peace, and fulfillment. You're going to end up in quite the opposite. So
Yeah.
we know not doing this doesn't work. So why not at least try to understand what God has for us here, and walking in His ways.
Yeah, and that's why we're bringing this up, because I've had, as all of y'all have, numerous conversations on the couches, and had people say, well, I love Jesus, but I'm not submitting to my husband.
Yeah.
I'm just out on that. So you're like, what do you do? Well, you read the text and say, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
This is the way this is designed. And numerous husbands is like, who are abusing their wife in some capacity or whatever. And you're like, you're not loving her like Jesus loved the church. You're not loving her like, and it seems like it's a detachment.
Right.
And the bottom line is their own faith in Jesus has to trump anything you can say and to experience. And I usually wind up saying that. Well, why don't you just try it? Why don't you both see how you can be Jesus and find your God-given role, and then just try it.
I've had many opportunities as well. I'll sit with a couple and they're going at it because obviously they've agreed to talk to you, and so they're going to tell you why the other person is wrong. And I noticed through all the years of listening, it's they use the word always and never a lot. Well, she never does this, and she never did that.
The language of absolutes.
Absolutely. He's always been this way, blah, blah, blah. So I listen to the always and nevers, and so, and they get to the end of it and say, okay, let me read you something. And I usually turn over to 1 Corinthians 13. And the only time in the Bible you see always and never are there, but it's always in love.
Yeah.
Love never fails. Love always protects. Always, and when you can take that and then put it right up against the language that you're listening to, it sounds so petty in that moment. Mm-hmm. But man, it motivates and drives people to where they want to get outside of what God wants for their marriage. And that's what we're saying. Look, if you can work through those situations and work through those hard times, I'm telling you, the payoff is unbelievable. And I know, because I had a difficult marriage, at least I did, until we got this right. And then we realized that what grows and comes out of that is so special and beautiful. I mean, it's just, and then you're so proud of it, and what it does.
We know that anyone born of God does not continue to sin. The one who was born of God keeps him safe, and the evil one does not touch him. We know that we are children of God and that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. We also know that the Son of God has come and given us understanding so that we may know him who is true. That's 1 John you talked about a while ago, Zach.
Yeah.
It's a pretty powerful thing. Jesus makes all the difference in the world.
No doubt about it. I mean, it just gives you such an advantage. Go ahead, Zach.
He pull you out there.
I was thinking, I mentioned that Philippians 2 passage. A lot of times you hear this. You'll hear someone say, you read that passage out of Ephesians, your wife submit to your husbands, husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church, and the husband's like, oh, I'll die for my wife, no question about it. But then the question is, but would you serve her? Would you put her needs before yours? Would you? And then those are the things. And you look at that Philippians 2 passage, to love your wife as Christ loved the church. It's not just that you would take a bullet for her, although it's part of that. But you look in Philippians 2, the part about submitting yourself to death as Christ did. That's the last thing that's mentioned in a list of things. And I wanted to read it because I think this is like, if you read any of this passage in Ephesians 5 as oppressive to women, then you have to understand this Philippians 2 passage, because this is what a husband is called to do.
That's right.
And the question I would have is any of this oppressive to women if a husband would embody this type of spirit? Here's what it says, that we should have the attitude of Christ Jesus, complete my joy by being in the same mind, verse 2, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition. The husband, if he's gonna love his wife as Christ loved his church, he does nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count your wife more significant than yourself. So right there, is that oppressive and limiting to women, or is this actually liberating? Verse 4. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others, having this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself. So the husband empties himself, taking the form of a servant. The husband becomes a servant, being born in the likeness of men, which that would just be the idea of condescending way beneath what you are. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. That's the call to the husband in Ephesians, is to embody that type of sacrificial love. And the question you got to ask yourself, does that sound like an oppressive union between man and woman if that's what the husband's doing? I don't think you could make that case.
Whenever I sign a book, Zach, I put Philippians 2, 3 through 5, what you just read, because that is it. And when somebody says, would you die for your wife? I always say, I do, every single day.
Yeah, I usually say, well, when are you going to start living for her? I'll give you another argument. I tried this at the last marriage. I'm not a counselor, but I'm saying people knock on my door and they come in, and here we go.
Well, I got a PhD in the School of Hard Knocks.
I tried this one. It didn't go well, but I thought I would try it. And because it was, if you talk to one member of the marriage, no, this is when a marriage has gone wrong.
Yep.
They basically saying, well, it's all her fault, and yada, yada.
Married the wrong.
Then you talk to the wife, and she's like, it's all his fault. I mean, it's ridiculous. So when I got to the man, I tried this because in Ephesians 5, 25, it says, husbands, love your wives. So I'm reading this because he just told me the 9 million things that she has done. Love your wives just as Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing and with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain, wrinkle, or any other blemishes, but holy and blameless. In this same way, which is what Christ did for the church, in this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own body. So I said, in the same way, your job, based on what we just read, is to present her as holy and blameless, which seems to be contrary of what you just did by blaming her for everything. Your job is supposed to present her blameless and holy as a washed new creation. This is your job. That's why it's not making sense to me.
Yep.
It didn't go well. But
But
my point is either this is true or it's not. So, because within all of our relationships, there has to be, forgiveness, accountability, transparency. Things are being made visible by the light. We're having tough conversations. That's what marriage is. It's just not rainbows and sunshines. It's daily struggles where you're trying to see, okay, how is Jesus being glorified in it? What do we need to do? What is the Spirit's model? I think every decision every day should be wrapped around that. But at the end of the day, we're to present our wives as men as holy and blameless. Just getting back to that, Christ shining on you. Look at this marvelous new creation that I get to spend eternity with.
Well, he wraps that whole section in 33 by saying, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So when Lisa and I do presentations, we've got one called Lovable and Respectable. And what we try to tell the people that we're speaking to is that if he's commanded me to love Lisa, as he loves me, then her goal should be to be as lovable as possible. Because make it easy for me. And if she's supposed to respect me, then I should be as respectable as possible. I should be working on that. So we always have a challenge. Men, Job 31, read it. And that's my assignment to you, Unashamed Nation. If you're a man and you want the respect of your wife, read Job 31. There's many things in there. I picked out 7. And then wives, you ladies that are listening, if you want to be more lovable, read Proverbs 31. And you'll see some characteristics and traits there, by the way, from back in the Solomon era, that will help you be more lovable. You can't change your spouse, but you can change yourself. And Zach said it well, because of what God can do in you. So if you work on you, I can promise you, in humility, you're going to get to where you want to go. So
yeah, and part of those respectable conversations is, one of the few things I'm good at in our marriage is when difficult situations come up with kids or whatever, I'm willing to have that conversation, because you realize where your wife's strengths and weaknesses are during this process.
And you usually grow the most, don't you, Jason, from going through something difficult.
Oh, exactly. Because look, I'm always like, no matter what's happened, let's have a Jesus conversation. Let's find the path of where Jesus is in this. And it's amazing.
And how we lost sight of him in the process, because that's what happens.
Because the worldly thing is just to run, get mad.
Or ignore it. Or
isolate.
Hide,
Yeah, ignore. And just one of the practical things, I know we're out of time, but that's why I never, my wife and I had a deal when we were dating. This started when we were dating, because we heard so many couples talk bad about the other person, like outside of their presence.
Right.
Especially with guys. If next time you're around a group of guys, just take note of how many negative things are said about some of their wives. in jokes. And so we made a deal to never say anything negative about each other in public.
That's a great practice.
That's where it started. But it came from this idea of presenting her holy and blameless. And you know what will happen? You'll get in the habit of not only not doing it in public, but not even doing it in private.
That's right.
So if you're only positive, all of a sudden a respect develops.
Good point.
From your wife.
It's a great practice. I'm glad you said that. I concur with that 100%. All right, we're out of time. So next time we'll try to pick it up here in Ephesians chapter 5 and 6.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.